Hello, today we are doing clay. So you will need your packet of clay that you have received. It will either be grey or red, either is fine. The grey is actually air drying clay, and you may find that it's been reinforced with fibres. That just means that if you get slightly fluffy bits at the end, and it looks like there's little bits of cotton or something in it, that's fine. It's meant to look like that. It's just supposed to help reinforce and make the clay a bit stronger. If your clay is a terracotta colour, a brown colour, that's actually not air drying clay. It is normal traditional clay, but it will still dry in exactly the same way as air drying. Either way, you're not going to be kiln firing either of them, so the clay will simply dry and it will never be quite as robust as something that has been kiln fired. But the problem with kiln firing something is that there's always a risk that it can explode or break. So you could spend hours and hours creating something lovely. It's always a risk firing it anyway, so quite often you might make the choice not to have it fired regardless. They both will still dry, and as long as you are careful with it and it's treated as an ornament, then it will be fine. You will need to have your sculpting tools, blue ones like this. I recommend having a paintbrush. Maybe if you happen to have an old thick one about, that's a good idea too. If you want to have your own knife, this is my giant one which I used to cut the clay up with. You can use your own knives. Although, I mean, this has been left to dry. It's got clay all over it. Most of this will actually just brush off, and you can actually wash most of this clay off, and the tool will be absolutely fine. Again, with the plastic tools, most of them can be cleaned when the clay is dry. It will simply brush away, or you can wash it and the water will dissolve the clay. I recommend, if there are any large amounts of clay on any of them, not to wash them in the sink and wash the clay down the sink, as it's not good to have anything like that sort of down your drains. You will need to make a little bit of slip, and this is literally just water with a little lump of clay dissolved in it. It's not particularly scientific. You don't need too much. So there's the remains of some of the clay that I put in there. You don't have to worry about getting it to dissolve completely. It doesn't matter. As long as you've got a murky brown pool of water, that's fine. So I'd recommend a lump of about that big in maybe a centimetre's worth of water. This is just a little pot that would have had coleslaw in it, okay, so you can get an idea of the size. Not that much. A jar of normal clear water. Normal water is also advisable to have around. I'm working on a little bit of blue plastic matting. If you haven't got one of these, you should have a laminated sheet, which is like a plastic sheet, A4 sheet. That's fine. I know that I did send out maybe 5 boxes that didn't have something to work on, so apologies for that. You could work directly onto the table, to be honest, if you were happy just to clean it up afterwards. You can work on a little bit of wood, very thick card, any form of plastic like this, a tablecloth, that's all fine. I would say that sometimes it's useful to have a separate piece that you can work on top in case the clay sticks to it, and then you can just keep the thing together. I'll explain about that in a minute. My clay has been quite well worked. I've done 2 sessions already using this lump. It's still perfectly usable, but you can see it's relatively dry. It's not sticky. Now, clay is not man-made as such. Of course, it's just dug out the ground and refined slightly. But each lump of clay can be slightly different. And I had one bag that was actually quite wet, and that can be slightly more difficult to handle. If you do have one of the lumps that is quite sticky, you might want to break a bit off that you're going to be using and really manhandle it. Give it a good old rub around, squeeze it. The more you handle clay, the more it will dry out. So if it's an overly sticky clay, then you might want to really give it a good squish for quite a little while. You could also take a lump and leave it out so that it has a little bit of drying time in the air, just to stop it from being too squidgy. Specifically for those people that have, say, rolled out some of their clay, a problem that we have found with 1 or 2 people in the sessions that I've done so far. See, this lifts up easily enough, but if it's really soggy, it can stick, and that can be a bit frustrating. So you can either attempt to get it off by using a knife, sort of very carefully trying to shuffle under it. Even something like this, you can help to, as if, just the same as if dough had gotten stuck on a board, if you were going to be making pastry. The alternative is that don't try and lift it off. If it's stuck down, you can just leave it there and continue working on it. When it eventually dries, it won't be permanently stuck. You can just lift it off. But say you want to be able to lift it up and down, maybe you might want to have a bit of cardboard or something. You could put your piece on there. If it sticks to it, it doesn't matter, because I can just take it away. I can move it around if I want to get to another bit of it. My main piece of mat is still here to work on, but I can move this out of the way and I can leave it on there to dry, and then once it's dry, it will just lift off. Okay, so that's something you can do. If you happen to have a one of these cake decorating little platform things, they're round and they spin around. Now you can often get sort of cheap plastic ones. They're a really good idea to work on, because you can put whatever it is you're doing on it, and then you can turn the plastic bit around without even having to touch this and move it. So all different things that you could possibly consider. Now, here are a few images of the kind of things that we could be making today. You are welcome to make whatever you want. Should you have a great desire to make a sheep or a cat, a tree, anything you want, then it's your piece of clay. You can do what you would like with it. Today I'm just going to show you a couple of little ideas. One is a relatively simple plaque. Say simple, it's never quite as easy as it looks. This is one larger one, and these are some little ones that you could put together. We will be looking at coil pots. These are examples of the coil pots. You could make a little trinket tray. This is an example of, they've cut out the shape of a leaf and made a little trinket tray. You could make something like this, seeing as it's coming up to Christmas, at the point that I'm recording this. This is a tiny little piece of clay cut into a square with a little robin placed on top, and once it's dried, it's been painted. Just make a little hole and you can hang it up. They're really effective, very sweet. Maybe you could do something like that even instead of a Christmas card. This was sent to me by a friend, and it was just instead of a Christmas card. Or if you had some thick card, you could attach that to the card and then send that as a Christmas card. Again, somebody else in one of the early groups, what they had done, they had created some little Christmas decorations. So if you imagine, they had cut out the shape of a Christmas tree, like that. And then once they'd cut it out, they had glued it to the back of to some thick card, and had effectively made their Christmas card with a little clay plaque on it. You would need to make sure that this is quite thin. Let me roll it out to that thickness that you would need. If you're going to be cutting something out to attach to a piece of card to something else, you really don't want it too thick. You need it quite thin. So you'll be looking at something about that thickness. Really quite thin, relatively delicate. But because you are sticking it to something, you can't be too heavy. If you're doing Christmas decorations that are just simply going to hang, it needs to be a little bit thicker. Okay, because particularly with things that are not fired, they are more delicate, And so if you make a Christmas decoration and you want to actually hang it up somewhere, you'd need it to be a little bit thicker, particularly at the edges. Again, I'll give you a little example. So if you imagine, right, I'll just do, this is the top of our Christmas tree. You get the idea. Now on air dry clay, little points like this are going to be more liable to break off as they dry. Okay, so if you've got a very thin piece of clay and it goes to quite a thin point, that as it dries may break off. It won't be very robust. So for something like a Christmas decoration, you do need it chunkier, so that when it dries it's a bit stronger. Okay, so that's a chunky side there compared to a thin side. That would be far more likely to break. Okay, so it's just thinking about what you are going to be doing with the item. If you're doing a little some form of pot that's simply going to be sitting on a mantelpiece, then it's going to be you can be create more delicate things because it's not going to be touched. Okay, now we'll start off with the plaque. If you have extremely sticky clay and you've maybe left it out for a little while, you've given it a good old manhandling and it's still really sticky, you may find that it's just too difficult to roll out. It might stick to the rolling pin or whatever you're using. You don't have to have a rolling pin. This is just an old drinks bottle. The lid's gotten lost, so I can use it instead. If it's sticking to things, if it's sticking to the mat, if it's sticking to this and you don't want it to, it may be a case of you might just have to flatten it out by hand and just accept it that you're going to have a bit of a rustic look, that it's not going to be as perfect as something that's been rolled out. Or you could flatten it out as much as you can by your hands and then give it a little roll just to sort of help smooth it out a bit, but without putting too much pressure on. Okay. So roll out your plaque, and I'm going to cut mine to a rectangle shape. It's entirely up to you. You could do a circular one, any shaped kind of one that you like. This is just you know, as an idea of something that you can do. Now, if it's gotten stuck, I think I can't remember what I said. Another alternative for trying to get something that's stuck off is cheese wire. I think you get a kind of thin piece of wire and it's got little bits of wood at the end and you can scrape that underneath it. That's sort of effectively what if you were a potter and you've done a pot on the wheel, it's very firmly attached. They have to use wire to run underneath the clay to get it off. Now, you can see my plaque is, let's have a look, you're looking at a centimetre. You don't really want to go any thicker than that. You can go a little bit thinner, but you don't want to go too thin because you want to keep it so that it's fairly strong. Okay, as you can see here, this corner here has begun to sort of dry out a little bit and it's got a slight crack to it. If you just damp one of your fingers down in some water, and you could put that over the top and smooth it down to get rid of that. The more you use something, the clay will dry out quicker. But if you want to smooth it out, you simply add some water in and that works fine. Okay. Now, the rule is, if you are going to be sticking two things together, you need to score and you need to use slip. Slip is kind of like thin glue. So I'm going to create just a little leaf that I'm going to stick on my plaque. So just going to make something approximate shape. There we go. Now, I would say I am not an expert in clay. this is just really a chance for you to have a go at doing something else with a medium you may not have used since you were at school. I've had no formal training in clay work. I've just made a few things which have survived and which I'm pleased with, and I know some of the basics. Yes, apologies if you're not getting quite as much information as you might like, but I'm sure you'll be able to create something. Now, scoring is you just score the thing you're going to stick down. Just like that. Score where you're going to put it. A little bit of slip. And there. And here. And you press it down. Now, I have a habit of using a small paintbrush quite a lot, and what I do is I use it to help weld those sides together. So I'm brushing it along, the clay dissolves very slightly and it helps sticking together. You can also use the paintbrush, use the pressure of the paintbrush to actually sculpt and mould, and you get a nice smooth effect like that. One of the tools that you will have will be something like this. It will have a slight curve to it. A slight curve to it. It's got a rounded edge there, and what you can do is you can use that to kind of weld the sides together. If you want to make absolutely certain that's well stuck down and isn't going to fall off when it dries, what you do is you push the edges together. If you're doing a lot of things where you're pushing the edges together, you actually need less slip and you don't have to worry quite so much with the scoring, because that is being well stuck down by merging the two pieces of clay together effectively. You can then smooth those marks out by using the paintbrush again if you want to. Just like that. You can use some of the sharper pieces of the tools to maybe put in a little bit more detail, like that. And then I might go back into it just to smooth those edges down a little bit. Depends what effect you want. It's just a case of playing around with things. If something goes wrong, you know, adding water to it, smoothing it back out can help fix things. Okay. Now, as well as sticking things on, you can carve out. So if you imagine, okay, so I'm going to do a leaf, and instead of sticking something on, I'm carving it out by taking away the clay that is around it. Now you could take out large amounts and the whole thing could be done by carving. So with this picture, the person will have scored out the shapes of all of them beforehand and then taken out the spaces in between all the leaves. Okay, you can do that, or you can use a bit of both. You could have something where you've actually got it stuck on as well as scoring out, scraping away. And then you can smooth it out either with a tool like this. You'll tend to find all the different tools that you have, there'll probably just be maybe 2 or 3 that actually you use a lot, and it is just a case of using them and deciding which one works for you. As I said, I'm no expert and don't know exactly which ones are used. I've just used my kind of common sense and played around with them. Or you can smooth it out by using the paintbrush. That helps smooth it out. Again, you can use a wet finger to help smooth things out. Sometimes you might find that if you've made a pot or a plaque or something, you've got fingerprints, because obviously clay is very good for taking imprints. You might get some imprints in it that you don't want. Simply get some of that water and smooth imperfections away. Clay stays workable for quite a long period, really. Don't have to worry about really rushing things. And if you are in the middle of creating something and then you have to finish, you've run out of time, but you haven't actually finished it, just wrap it back up in your cling film and it will be fine, and that will protect it. Obviously be very, very careful. If it was a pot, say it was a little pot, you might need to make sure you stick some in the middle of it as well as surrounding it. Just use plenty to make sure that there's as little air around it as possible. But do be aware that every time you take it off and you carry on working on it, it's still drying. So we'll get to a point, particularly smaller items, we'll get to a point where actually you are kind of limited to what you can do, and it's just a case of keeping an eye on it. You can feel when things are beginning to dry out. But until they're actually drying, you can carry on adding water. Now this is something that I made on Monday, so that's 48 hours ago. You can already see the change in the colour. Now obviously it's the change in the colour will give you a good indication that it's how much it's drying out. The paler it becomes, the drier it is. And so this is already pretty dry within 48 hours. But it has been left to dry, it's not been bagged up or anything. Okay. So keep an eye on it, and as it gets paler, you know that it's drying. And once it's something like this, you can't add water to it and expect to be able to work on it once it becomes hard. Okay. So here's your little plaques. You can do as you wish. If you're putting something circular in it, say you wanted to put, if you look on this one, just here you've got lots of little balls. Now balls are quite hard to stick on because there's not much actually touching the clay to help it stick. So what you do is you need to make a little imprint, a little hole, and then you get some of your slip, and maybe see if you can find a bit of the slip where there's still some very soggy clay, and you can fill that with some very soggy clay, put some on your little ball and then push it into place, and then again make sure you put plenty of slip around the edges. Now that's going to hold it much more firmly in place because it was a concave area that you were putting the ball into, so this bit here is holding it in place a little bit more, rather than attempting to just take a ball and stick it on like that. If you stick it on like that, it's far more likely to fall off than that one. Okay. Once something's dry and maybe you've had a few delicate little bits that you put on, if something has fallen off, you can glue them back on. That's not a problem. Okay. So you can make all sorts of different plaques. I remember when I was a child, I spent a great deal of time making little kind of like little fairy gardens where I'd make a base and then make little benches and flowers and plants. So whatever you fancy doing. I'll show you now the imprint method. This is a little pot that I made. So it's like a little trinket bowl really. And all it was okay, I'm just going to squash this side down. So we use the same piece. Took a leaf, pushed it well in, you know, really big leaves that have got good strong veins, make lovely imprints. And I'm going to do this very quickly, obviously you will want to take a bit more care. You cut out your leaf shape. Right. Okay, there's one leaf. And then I'm going to do another leaf. Again, obviously I'm doing this very quickly, you might want to take a little bit more care over if you want to do it properly. Again, push it down, the shape of the leaf. I'm going to cut it out. Now, you see this bit's got a little bit stuck down, so I pushed down. I'm just going to give it a little wiggle with that. Helps lift it up. There we go. And you're going to join the two of them together, however you wish. Sort of fiddle with it first, decide where you might want to join it. Okay, I might join it like that. So, again, you're going to need to, actually I'll score it first. Score the edges where it's going to be joined together. And some slip. Be careful with the slip. You do need enough that you can see it, but don't drench it, because it is still water, and water will gradually dissolve all that clay and can make it overly slippy and sloppy, and then it's hard to work with. You literally just stick the two together. Now I'm going to use my paintbrush on this side to make sure that they're pretty well welded, but I want to keep the definition of the two leaves. So I'm trying to be quite careful. I'm pushing these edges down together and then going back into it to give it a little bit of definition. So I'm pushing the edge, but then sweeping around to make sure that you can still get the sense of the leaf. Okay. Now if I turn it over, I can weld the bit at the back much more firmly together, because it's the underneath, we're not going to be seeing it in the same way. Could do being a little bit flatter anyway, so I'm really pushing all that clay together to make sure it's very firmly. I'm balancing it on there and trying not to push to squash the other side. Just sort of balancing it. Okay. So I've really sort of welded those, smoothed all those bits together, and I'll flip it back over. Now I want it to hold into that kind of shape, but the weight of it could pull it down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a little basket like this, which will help keep the shape. Okay, it gives it a little bit of support. And it doesn't matter that it's in here, it won't stick to it. When it dries, it would definitely not stick. You could use a normal bowl. It won't damage the bowl, it won't stick to the bowl, it will just sort of hold it, support it in place whilst it's drying. Okay, so you can do that. Now, as I said, this one I did 48 hours ago. It's not completely dry and hard, which means that I can actually still work into it. Now this is just a plastic knife, so if you imagine that a metal knife would work even better, I can actually still score into it and carve. So if you want some really sort of quite delicate work put on it, you can still do that. Now it creates a dust because it's dry. Dust it out with a paintbrush. Do be careful, obviously, because dust isn't good for you. If you suffer from asthma or anything like that, make sure that you're very gently just brushing it away from yourself, so it's not going up into the air. Or, you know, obviously you don't have to do this technique, this is just something you can do. And what you can do is, as you're leaving something to dry, you could keep coming back to it and just checking to see how hard it is, whether you can carve into it. If I'd done this at 24 hours, it would have it would have been slightly different, probably less dusty. But obviously drying times isn't going to be exactly the same for everyone, because it will depend on the humidity of the room, the temperature of the room. But pretty much everything will be dry within a week and ready to decorate or paint should you wish to. Okay, so you can do that. You can sculpt into things even after they've dried or begun to dry. Okay. So the other thing we were looking at that you can make would be a coil pot. There's a little one that I began to make earlier in an earlier session. You can make the base in two ways. If you've got very squidgy clay, you might want to make the base almost, prepare the base first with your hands, getting it into the right kind of shape, rather than rolling it out and it's sticking. And you could use something as a guide to cut out a circular base. Like that. Right, this is way too thick, so I'm going to continue squishing it down. And because most of this base won't be seen, it doesn't matter if it's a bit rustic and a bit messy like that. If you're finding it hard to roll things out, you can just do it by hand. If it's dry enough that you can roll it by hand, that's fine. Now that's a pretty good thickness for a base. No more than 1 centimetre, probably no less than ½ centimetre, I would say. Cut that out. Now you just add coils to it. So, which is, you make your sausage shape, roll it out. When you are using smaller amounts of clay, the clay often does begin to dry out quite quickly. If it begins to crack and you get bits, it's you don't get a smooth edge to it. What you can do is just wet your fingers and continue using it with just slightly damp fingers. That will help keep things more malleable. Or I should say, make sure you've taken any rings off before you start. This one's not so bad, it's only a little old silver ring. But if you've got something that's far more delicate with little bits that the clay can get stuck into, make sure you've left it off. Now, just make sure it's, oh yeah, that's pretty good. The right size, I can use that. If it's too big, just chop a little bit off. And again, you need to score the bottom where you're sticking it. Score that. And you need your slip. Go, and this bit. You stick it down. Now, so what I'm going to do is on the outside bit, I want to keep those coil shapes. I don't want it to be all smoothed off. So I'm sort of using that slip and the slightly goopier clay to help weld those bits together, like that. Okay, now you can also, and this is particularly advisable, particularly for those first few coils at the base, which are going to have to be quite sturdy to hold the weight of the pot as it gets bigger. I would scrape those sides down, weld those sides together like that. So it doesn't matter if you lose the coil on the inside, because at this point you wouldn't be able to see it once all the coils have been added. Oops. because you want a nice strong base. Okay, if you do this one, that's the base, and then I've put a really chunky coil on, and I would recommend actually those first few coils you want quite big and chunky. They can become more delicate as they go up, that's no problem, but these are going to be holding quite a lot of weight as the pot gets higher, so you want those bits to be well, quite strong, well glued together as such. Okay, like that. Now, if you see with this ones, I've added, you know, different kinds of coils. I'm going this way round. For something like that, you want them to be a bit thinner. Then I need to make my hands a little bit damper. Okay. Particularly as it gets thinner and thinner, it will start drying out, and you might start getting that sort of cracking on it, which might not look that pleasant. So keep rolling it out. It's nice and thin. Okay, right, I'm going to make it quite wet because it's got to sort of stick to itself, and then start coiling it. Now this one's a little bit chunky. I'd probably like something a little bit more delicate. There we go, just rolling it, make that little snail shape. Now, if you're attaching something like this, that's not going to be as easy as because it's upright. One thing you could do would be that you could attach it to the outside of the coil, like that, a decoration like that. But if you're placing it on top, I've left a little bit extra at the end to smooth down to help hold it in place. Okay, so I didn't coil the whole thing. I'm going to smooth that bit down, and that will help hold it in place. So there's the coil, and then the extra bit that came along here I've now smoothed down into the pot. Help hold it. Right. It might be an idea, if you're going to put several around, to maybe have several of these ready to go, because they can lean against each other and help support each other. And to help these bits stick together, what I would do, I would find a bit of that slip, which is just slightly goopy clay. There we go. It's not completely watery, but it's very goopy. And I'll take a little bit of that, and I will put that in the gap between them. I did so, obviously, here. That could do with a bit of goopy clay to help join, like that. Make sure you do both sides. There we go. I've put a little ball on that one. Again, it would be an idea if you're going to place the ball on it to maybe make a little indent like that to help the ball sit in place. Just going to dip the ball directly into the slip. Place it on there. If the worst comes to the worst, and as it dries out, one bit isn't as well stuck and seems a bit loose, again, you can always use glue to help stick it together. Putting that goopy slip around it to help hold it in place. Okay, so you just have fun with it. There are some images that I've shown you. I'm just drying my hands. And here there's lots of different ones. You can plait, you can put sort of flowers in there, and as you can see, with this one, hopefully you can see there's a slight imprint, so you could actually imprint things on them, and that makes it look like it's a rope. You could actually have pressed a rope into it to get that sense. These ones, you know, you've got a whole variety of coils and swirls and balls. There's no right or wrong way. So keeping it rustic looking, so don't worry about being too careful and precise with it. There is one other way to start a pot, which is the sort of traditional pinch pot way, which is what you would have probably done at school. I know I have lots of pinch pots at home that my kids have made me over the years when they were in primary school. Usually you put sort of tea lights in them, or little candle holders, and they just start off as a ball of clay. And then you literally just push your thumbs down into the pot to create the base, or the entire pot. It's quite a crude way to start, but it is a way. You just keep pushing down. I'm going to use this. I'll push down that clay. It's not easy to get a smooth finish this way. But that is a base that you could start with, and then you could still add coils to it. Particularly if your clay is very sticky and you're having trouble rolling out a perfect nice circle, you could just start with it this way. Trying to keep a sort of level, keeping it level, and also keeping the same width of clay all the way around is actually quite hard, particularly with this pinch pot style. But you can see that can start be the basis of the pot. And if you want to smooth things out, make sure your fingers are a bit wet, and you can literally smooth out the sides more effectively that way. Like so. You know, after a little while you can begin to smooth it. It certainly gives a much stronger base, gives a very strong base to work from, particularly if you're doing quite a big chunky design on top. So it certainly has a place. They're quite hard to do if you've got any form of fingernail, because as you're doing this it just begins to scrape in. Remember, as you work it, it will be drying, so you might need to keep your hands. Oh, that's just playing around there. You get quite a nice effect actually. Particularly if you've never really used clay before, or haven't used it for a very long time, you know, it is a case of trial and error, just seeing how things go, and not expecting too much straight away, because it's always, for most people, it's harder than it looks. Okay, so you can see I've already smoothed that out, so it's not too bad. You don't want sort of cracks like this left in it. You need to smooth those over, because those cracks can get worse as it dries. Keep a damp finger and smooth them off. Okay, that's that one. I'll just give you show you a little example of one that I made a few years ago. So this is started off life as a coil pot, so it's just a flat base. Now it's kind of hard to show via the visualizer, but it's actually asymmetrical. This side is shorter than this side. There you go, that's better, you can see it now. As you can see, this side is much shorter, and it's because I built it up gradually in coils, and as it got bigger and bigger I could not keep it level. one side kept getting bigger than the other, so I decided to go with it, and so went with the medium rather than fighting it, and that's something you need to learn, is that sometimes you go with what it seems to be wanting to do. Now you can see this leaf here is made out of clay and stuck on top there, and this bit here, there's another bit of a leaf here, that's actually been carved out. So rather than sticking another piece on top, I've carved away so to make it in relief. Okay, it's then painted with white gesso, which is just a form of white paint. It's almost like a white emulsion paint, really. It's what you put on paintings before you paint on the canvas. Okay, and then the reason it's so well defined is because I've then drawn on top of it with a watercolour pencil. So I coloured it in and then added water to make it run. It's a bit like pen and wash, but you're doing it with a pencil, which is more delicate. That's why you can make it out. So you have lots of different options once you've actually made things to what you do with it. You can decorate them however you like. That's that one. Okay, so little bits that you have left lying around, squish them all up into one as soon as possible. If you leave little bits lying around, they do dry out quite quickly, so it's often a good idea to keep those small bits mushed together. Even if you're carrying on working with them, mush them back together a little bit, like that. Now painting, once they're dry, give it a week and they'll definitely be dry by then. You can use acrylic paints. I recommend them because they're very thick, they're opaque. You can paint directly from the tube without any water, because if you don't want to be using too much water on top of clay. Even though it's dried, it hasn't been fired, it is still just air dried clay, so it will always have a certain porosity to it. But you can actually use watercolours. They will be paler and they will be more of a wash effect. And what you don't want is just to put some water on it and then give it a wash. That's too watery. What you need is you need to work that water into the paint until it's not really watery anymore. It's actually almost like a paste on top. It has a thickness to it because there's a lot of paint in there, a lot of the pigment. As you can see, it's much more opaque. Okay, and this will still bleed into the posh bit, so the colours will not be as vibrant, say, as acrylic paints, but they still give quite a nice effect, something you could play with. I know one of the ladies from the course earlier today was going to give it a go with some nail polish. That would probably work quite nicely because they're nice, bright, vibrant colours. And I've had people before who have just rolled them in glue and stuck glitter all over them. Once it's dried, you can do as you wish. Again, it's always slightly trial and error with these things. And of course, you're more than welcome just to Google different ideas of things that you can do with clay. Lots of lovely things out there on YouTube that you could look at. So it's just always remembering to use your slip when you're sticking things together, a little bit of scoring. I like to put patterns and things in by using my paintbrush, actually sculpting with the paintbrush. It's less harsh than using something like this, which makes a very definite line sometimes. With a paintbrush you can be a little bit more subtle. these are just a few ideas of the different things that you can do. Yes, as I was saying, I mean, if you wanted to have a go at making a pot and you didn't want coils, then making a coil pot which is smooth is hard, and it is very difficult, but it is doable. You need to keep those fingers damp to help smooth those edges together. So pots that have just been completely handmade without a potter's wheel are often coil pots with their edges smoothed. I have a friend who's made some amazing pots by this technique. It is incredibly hard and time consuming to get that to get a really lovely smooth finish, but it is possible. And I mean, most potters will who once they've mastered, you know, using a potter's wheel, it's much simpler to make a basic pot using the potter's wheel than by using this method. If you really love clay and would like to have proper lessons in it, I can recommend a gentleman who works at North Walsham High School. He does an evening class. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it's not running at the moment because no one outside of the school is allowed in. But you can keep an eye open for that if you happen to be in the North area. Wensum Lodge, which does adult education and advertises adult education courses in Norwich, they're a good place to start. They have often done pottery things in the past. Unfortunately, a lot of adult education has been cut when it comes to the arts and crafts. They like you to come out with an actual qualification, academic qualification, I should say. So they might not be funded. They may be privately run, and of course they're not cheap. But they usually have the ability to then fire things for you, should you want to go down that route. And of course, using a potter's wheel and seeing if you have a knack for that. So as you can see, I've smoothed out those. It's very hard. I can still see a slight indent there. It's very difficult to get rid of it altogether. But you might find it quite therapeutic. Okay, so remember, if you're carrying on working with something but you need to cover it up, keep it well wrapped up. See, it can be quite difficult when it's something very delicate. Keep it wrapped and keep an eye on it. Don't leave it too long in between working on it, because you need to keep an eye on it to make sure it's not drying out and it's gotten to a point where you can't actually work on it, because of course there is some air still left in there. Okay, it will only take a couple of days to get to this stage, 48 hours, and it's already quite dry. Okay, the clay that you don't use, just again wrap it up very well in cling film, or if you've got polythene, a polythene bag. That all works well. You'll find as your lump gets smaller, the smaller pieces will dry out more quickly. Even when they're wrapped in polythene, they can still begin to dry out. Okay, the more you use the clay, the drier it often becomes. You can give it a slight misting, you know, with one of those little misters that you might spray a plant with. That would help sort of dampen it up a little bit. I can't recommend sort of putting a load of water on it, because that simply just affects the surface of it, and it won't do it any harm to sort of give it a little coat like that before you wrap it up. But you don't want to make it too sticky and slippy anyway. Have a look around the house for interesting things that you could imprint into your clay. If you find that maybe you're not the most artistic person in the world, you could make a little plaque and find interesting things to stick in it and make patterns instead. If you have some stamps, maybe some ink stamps, you know, you get the little little wooden blocks that you can stick on the press into ink pads and make interesting patterns. They work. You can use those kind of things that children might use. Just leaves and twigs and little dried bits of plant you can stick in to get some nice effects. So certainly, you know, play around with it. Okay, well, I hope that's been reasonably informative for you, so you can at least make something and have a go. And good luck. And if you have some pictures that you'd like to send me, that would be great. I shall put it on the website, www.creativehealthathome.com, which you should already know about, seeing as you will have followed the link there to here. But just in case you happen to have come across this on YouTube separately. Remember to wash out your paintbrushes well once they've been used with the clay. Obviously clay, once it dries, it tends to just disintegrate when it's small amounts, but to keep the paintbrush living as long as possible, because obviously you are putting it under quite a lot of stress by digging it in and squidging it around in something that's quite solid. But I mean, that's been used quite a few times now, several hours worth of use, and it's still good enough that you could actually paint with it. So give it a really good wash out and a dry. Okay. Yeah, good luck. Have some fun. Remember, don't flush this away. Don't pop it down the drains, because you've got little lumps of clay in there. Just bring it outside and maybe in the garden or something, just on some soil or grass. Certainly won't hurt it. Yes. Thank you very much, and see you next time.